Labour and Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. We have been, for most part of the year, honorable members on oversight, crisscrossing the landscape of our country, visiting all the 9 provinces. We had the opportunity to break into 2 teams as led by the Chairperson of Employment and Labour, Mudunjwa, and the other is led by myself as the Chairperson of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development. Ours was a simple task to go and visit farm workers and farm dwellers and labor tenants across the landscape of our country, and to look into their living and working conditions. Having done that, we were able for each province to compile a report, which became a part of the reports that formed this consolidated report, which will be presented before the Joint Portfolio Committee this morning. As I've said, all other reports of the provinces have been detailed, and those honorable members or those stakeholders that come from the various respective provinces will be able to access those reports of the provinces, because they have been detailed as to what our findings were, as well as observations and recommendations. But for the consolidated report, which will be presented to the Joint Committee this morning, it talks to the entire findings that we were able to observe during our oversight. I therefore want to welcome all the honorable members to this joint sitting, as well as the officials of both departments of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, as well as Employment and Labour, who have joined the meeting. We'd like to also welcome our staff, content advisors, researchers, and our secretariat who have been at work in ensuring that we have a consolidated report that we can be able to present before Parliament. We will therefore request the content advisors to take us through the report. It has been circulated, honorable members, to all of us, so that we have an ample time to read and go through it. So I've requested that the content advisors go through the report, but they should deal in detail on what our observations were, and then speak to the recommendations of the report. Once that has been done, if there are any further issues of clarity or questions, we will enable honorable members to interact with the document and give further input of clarity. Once we have dealt with that, we'll then adopt the report so that it can be tabled before Parliament. That is our agenda for today, honorable members. I will hand over to the Honorable Chairperson of Employment and Labour, Mudunjwa, for opening remarks. Mudunjwa.
Good morning, Chair, and good morning to honorable members of both committees, and to also the staff from both committees, I don't have any opening remarks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Mahmoud Tundra, the Chairperson of Employment and Labor. I see in our messages, I think it's Honorable Pahremi. Are you not able to hear the proceedings? Michael Pahremi. Okay, it seems to not be responding. I was just noticing the message he put in the chat group that is unable to hear us. Let me therefore, honorable members, invite our content advisors to take us through the report of the joint committees of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, as well as Employment and Labor, on our findings on the living and working conditions of farm workers and farm dwellers and labor tenants. Good morning, Dr. Manenje.
Good morning, Chair and your co-chairperson, and good morning, honorable members, and colleagues, and everyone on the platform. I will be taking members through the report, and as the chairperson advised, not to read word for word. But try and just outline what each section is about and go and focus more on the recommendations, perhaps key conclusions and recommendations. And again, just to say, to again reiterate what the chairperson has said, that this is a consolidation of all the issues. So we tried to bring everything together, starting from the briefing sessions we've had with government departments and stakeholders, also the public hearings and the visits to to identified farms. So as you will see, or you will have noticed, it's more of a discussion in a thematic way about the issues that have been observed. And in terms of observations and key conclusions, we draw mainly from the inputs and questions and discussion that members of the the two committees had with stakeholders, departments, as well as the farm dwellers or labor tenants or farm workers in general. So just by way of background, members are aware of the resolution of the House that mandated these two committees to conduct oversight, and I believe everyone has read those, and that is the basis for our terms of reference. And it is these two committees again that had in one of the first meetings just to define the scope, realizing that the work is broad, and the agreement was then to focus on land access and secure tenure, farm employment and labor dynamics, the living and socio-economic conditions in farming areas, as well as rural safety and plans. So in terms of oversight, broadly, that's what this committee, the two committees actually focused on. I'm not going to go through this. This is a direct extract from the minutes of the National Assembly, detailing what these two committees should do. Just to say that, as members are aware, that the two committees were meant to report on the 30th of November last year, but unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond the control of the committee, like the COVID regulations and restrictions on travel, the committee could not conclude its work, and an extension was granted after the committee made request to the House. So this section it's basically about the approach and methods and what the committee really tried to focus on, because this was more of a participatory the process of the two groups. Chairperson has already said that to cover a wide area, there were two groups that dealt with the oversight visits in various provinces. Those were the key activities. I'm not gonna dwell much on that. Section 3.2 derives mainly from the presentation by States SA, which briefed the committee about the socio-economic kind of profile. Who are the people that live on farms? And the next one, the presentation deals with the structural factors that impact on work. And it drew mainly from an ILO study that was presented to the committee by Ms. Fesser, who really looked more on the regulatory framework and the private, particularly from the public and the private entities that do enforcement of some of the regulations. From government side, mainly the Department of Employment and Labor. From the private side, she spoke about Global Gap, CESA, and others, and how those really end up impacting on the working conditions. So I take members have time to read on this report, and we can take questions and comment at a later stage. This number 4 is really now looking at the implementation of policy and programs from the side of government departments. The first one draws mainly from the implementation of the Labor Tenants Land Reform Act, mainly about the labor tenant applications and the process that progress that has been made to date. And yeah. And also it again sort of takes on inputs from stakeholders that presented before the committee. It goes on to look at the budgets and the expenditure around farm dweller program, and the whole issue around land acquisition and allocation of land to farm dwellers and labor tenants. Again, it started with labor tenants, but then it goes on to talk about the evictions. Mainly here it deals with ESTA, and the committee took time to really look at how ESTA is being implemented and the legal representation from the department to the legal aid board and the plans that the legal aid board has for the program. And on to note that in terms of the legal services, that has been transferred to legal aid board, but the department is keeping the mediation services. Since we also heard, the committee heard about a move towards more of alternative dispute resolution mechanisms. The next one is mostly, it derives mainly from a briefing by the South African police, what they have been doing with regard to the crime in farming areas. The two areas which are prominent that they talked about mainly was the stock theft and the farm attacks. And when they speak about farm attacks, it's a broad concept that refers to either assault, murder, rape, damage to property, all sorts, and they are all under the name of attacks. And they time to talk about their strategy in terms of the policing in rural areas, and the report goes into detail about the input from the South African police services. And the next one, which is 4.3, it looks at employment and labor, and mainly here it's about the inspection and enforcement services, with a particular focus on what happens on farms. And the committees agreed on, I think it's 5 pieces of legislation or areas. Is it 4? 1, 2, 3, 4 areas of inspection, which is mainly pieces of legislation that the Department of Employment and Labor implements, and also monitors compliance, and they also are responsible for enforcement. So there were issues that were raised by the department, and they also gave progress report with regard to the inspections, how many of those were compliant, and how many the notices were issued. It's there. And looking at the 5 key areas, the basic conditions of employment, employment equity, unemployment insurance, and COIDA and occupational health. So you can see the work that they have done over the years, and that section goes to talk about the challenges. In terms of basic services, as members had during public hearings, many complaints about access to drinking water, but also, taking it further to talk about sanitation and refuse collection. This was mainly from COCTA, which the committee wanted to address the outcomes of the court judgment in the Mshengu matter, and how that impacts on municipalities' capabilities to provide services on farms. Given the fact that there is a whole notion of private farms, and you can't come and provide services. The details are there. Then was the issue, the human settlement presented is input around provision of housing on farms, and you can see there the needs register and how little the numbers are from farms. And again, worrying because of what members would have seen on farms, mud houses, not being allowed to maintain houses, or not even to build new houses. There was a briefing on women and children on farms, as well as the social services. A link between what the 2 departments were doing on farms, and and in some of the communication afterward, they do confirm that not much has been happening from their side, and there are plans from the departments to begin to do more. So the section that follows, then we then try and bring in the together, sort of weave together the observations from the briefings, and also the observations from public hearings and the visits. And this discussion is contained in section 5, which is mainly of that. I will skip this section because to a large extent, it brings together all the issues that I have said and corroborate that by evidence from public hearings. I want to jump quickly to look at the key conclusions, which mainly brings us back, or the committee back, to what were the key concerns when the committee started. So there was the issue, one was about why there were continued evictions and human rights violation on farms despite the legislation. that is meant to protect farm dwellers, and how have government initiatives to provide security improve rural livelihoods of farm dwellers fared to date, and the agricultural sector in its production and employment dynamics, how does it contribute to improvement of the socioeconomic conditions on farms, and what are the safety security concerns? And yes, so these are sort of the four main areas, and the basis of these questions, and understanding members' questions and issues, the following conclusions can be made. One was that the committee concluded that problem identification and remedial action or recommendation proposed by the South African Human Rights Commission, and here we're talking about the relevant inquiries, the parliamentary high-level panel to assess the impact of legislation and fundamental change, and the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land, Reform and Agriculture, demonstrated the capacity of the state to review and produce plan. But you know, what the two committees observed is a lack of evidence on the implementations of the recommendations from these reports, which thus contributes to continued violation of farm dwellers and labor tenants, land and human rights. So the argument, the conclusion here is that it had the executive implemented some or even all of the recommendations, perhaps the situation would be much better at this stage. The next one is inadequate institutional capacity to monitor and respond to threats of evictions as well. Actual evictions could be among the principal factors that underlie most illegal evictions. Institutional weaknesses can be observed in the collapse of intergovernmental coordination forums, at least in practice, and their responses to investigations. So the conclusion again is that useful capacity in SAPS, CCMA, Department of Employment and Labor, Department of Human Settlement, Department of Justice, Department of Social Development, Department of Cooperative Governance, and municipalities has not been fully coordinated. Hence farm dwellers find themselves living along the roadsides after evictions, or spending over a year or two living in emergency shelters without water and electricity, living in community halls for a period that is over 10 years. And those that have been in Mpumalanga would remember, you know, a family or a number of households that were evicted in 2012 and to date community. Not to say that there weren't interventions, but you know, engagements between the department and the victims of evictions has not resulted in the improvement or them moving into the houses that the state has built for them. Sometimes, again, we're talking about coordination here and inadequate institutional capacity. You'll find from what the members heard from public hearings that farm dwellers sometimes go to court without legal representation, and magistrate courts granting eviction orders without probation reports or taking into consideration probation reports, or not subjecting their orders to a review by the land claims court. So a lot of work needs to be done around institutional reorientation and capacity building. Allegations that police officers at local police stations often to refuse open cases of illegal evictions from farms as criminal cases, and lack of prosecution in the event that such cases are open, points to weak or almost absent training program for law enforcement agencies on ESTA and LTA. And members would remember that SAP said they issued a National Instruction 7 of 2017, which clarified that farm evictions, mainly illegal evictions, are, you know, criminal offense in line with ESTA. The oral submissions to the two committees about officers telling them that the farms are farmers' property and farm dwellers ought to leave, shows lack of local level understanding of legally protected land rights. What appears as trespassing at face value could be complex contestations of legally protected land tenure rights of farm dwellers or occupiers. And therefore, registration of all rights on farms, especially for farm dwellers and labor tenants, could strengthen tenure rights of farm dwellers in broad terms. Legislative gaps in ESTA and LTA, again, this in the beginning, we clarify what these acronyms are. LTA's Labor Tenants Land Reform Act have resulted in evictions which often leave occupiers homeless for a range of reasons, including lack of safeguards to limit the risk of homelessness when evictions are granted, failure of cost to satisfy itself about alternative accommodation prior to evictions, and lacking consideration of probation reports. In addition, legislative gaps have resulted in widows, spouses, children of long-term occupiers being evicted after the death of the husband or parents, or when long-term occupiers stop working for the landowner. Yeah, okay. Scroll down here. Provision of equitable access to land through Section 17 of LTA, this one that gives limitations in terms of by when labor tenants should have applied for the provision or acquisition of land. It means that a majority of farm dwellers, including lay tenants, cannot apply for acquisition of land that they occupy in terms of LTA. The closing date on 31 March 2001 exclude many who would have wished to apply. Similarly, Section 4 of ESTA, again, this is all about on-farm acquisition of on-farm settlement, acquisition of land by monies appropriated by Parliament, empowering the minister to purchase land for farm dwellers. It has limitations in that it is mostly triggered by evictions rather than a proactive government programmatic approach to acquire land to secure their tenure. But in this case, the impact of Section 4 of ESTA could not be assessed due to absence of specific information or data about farms acquired in terms of Section 4, though the department was requested to bring this detail. The presentations did not go into those details. The appointment of the Special Master of Labor Tenants at the Land Claims Court, although done at the insistence of the Land Claims Court, is a welcome initiative that is likely to assist processing all labor tenants applications. However, the fact that the Department of Agriculture could not present to Parliament, to these two committees, specific budget and expenditure report for the Special Master's implementation plan, the court required the Special Master to develop an implementation plan. That there were no, specific budget for that presented about the implementation plan raises concern with regard to availability of resources and prioritization of the settlement of labor tenant claims. Failure to speedily resolve all the applications means, and applications here we're talking about the labor tenants applications, means that labor tenants would continue living under precarious tenure conditions. And when we talk about precarious here, members will remember, and it's discussed elsewhere in this report, where the owners, particularly when new owners take over farms, they begin to say, you are not allowed to move here, your rights are limited here. They fence in these communities, they limit the livestock, they do not allow visitors, so people can't be allowed to bury. So this is what we refer to about these uncertain tenure conditions. In terms of class, one of the things that members observed is around the allocation of class farms to emerging farmers. I'm going to go to it now. Without verifying the number of farm dwellers or labor tenants on farms, and is as members have heard, it leads to tensions and conflicts between emerging farmers and labor tenants or farm dwellers already living on farm, in some cases as long-term occupiers. So here we're talking about these, the overlap, and what farm dwellers themselves were saying, seems to be a tension here, or prioritization of either redistribution or restitution, because then farms are given to other people while they are there and living there with long-term rights on the land. As some emerging farmers have reported, it contributes to failure of emerging farmers, as they had to contend with difficulties of managing large number of people who are not in their employment. In similar vein, farm dwellers, labor tenants attribute the neglect or non-prioritization of their land needs to corruption and nepotism by government officials. And the committees were informed about new beneficiary selection policies, and then the committee says, given these new policies, begin to prioritize those who work, live on, and who live on and work on farms, rather than the lessees, some of them who are part-time farmers. And just to demonstrate that, the beneficiary selection policy will begin to improve things. The members would have seen some of the targets of the department, that it specifically says number of farms must have been allocated to farm dwellers, women and youth, despite the fact that in the last reporting period, the targets were not met by the department. The equity schemes, members visited a number of equity schemes. These schemes have really been touted as success story for collaboration of private sector in land reform. Yet in most cases visited by the committees, farm dwellers did not have full understanding of the operations of the enterprises. Some of them informed the delegation that they have never received dividends from businesses, did not know or understand their equity share, the roles and responsibility, and some of them continued operating as farm workers rather than equity partners. The portfolio committee attribute the state of affairs to lack of capacity building and empowerment programs by the schemes or government, as well as weak or lack of government oversight on these schemes. Acquisition of land and transfer to farm dwellers, farm workers, labor tenants without complementary program for development support that improve their livelihoods limits the success rate of land reform farms. So it's a conclusion based on the fact that some of these farms that members visited would find farm dwellers were given a farm and they're sitting there, but in terms of livelihood activities, very little is happening. Still waiting for inputs, supply, for development funding. So failure of beneficiaries to use land productively can be attributed to failure of the department to coordinate various units or branches to provide needed support on farms, as well as failure to trigger intergovernmental collaboration for maximum support to communities. Whilst the district development model has been touted as a solution to the challenges, land reform farms visited did not demonstrate how DDM, the district development model, was implemented. If anything, branches of the Department of Agriculture Land Reform were operating in silos. Within the department, it would appear that there weren't communication or coordination. Limited funding for program of security of tenure, including redistributive aspects of ESTA and LTA, has constrained efforts to build the necessary human resource capacity and acquisition of land for redistribution to farm dwellers and labor tenants. In the report, we do demonstrate the budget allocation and its percentage share to the rest of the department. It's very little. So and that's why members were heard during the briefing sessions and in visiting provinces how limited the staff capacity or human resources in capacity in the various district And again, there's a acknowledgement and recognition that there is a budgetary constraints is a serious issue, but failure to show budget for LTA applications may also explain the slow pace with which settlement of applications has taken place. So here the report also has demonstrated the decline in terms of the processes of settlement of labor tenants claims. And we then, in conclusion, the committee is attributing that to the budget, that there isn't enough budget. Municipalities appear to not have internalized the obligations they have to provide services buyers or labor tenants living on farms. And committees had many people complaining about lack of the services, access to water and electricity. But the court judgment that we referred to, it presents an opportunities for municipalities to reflect and integrate within their planned service delivery to farm dwellers, and especially their homes on private farms. And perspectives from the farmer organization Kwanalu in KZN was saying there's also this uncertainty where farmers do not understand the implications, what happens when the state invest in a way on a privately owned property, what, yeah, I guess they're not too sure. So there has to be that engagement at that level. So high levels of crime in rural areas have resulted in what we call proliferation of private security companies in farming communities. Landowners who are involved in land tenure disputes appear to use private security companies to brutalize farm dwellers by conducting raids and evicting people from farms. So we've had evidence of these private companies being used to evict people, harass people. Okay. And again, the report does show in some instances, this whole, although it's criminal as well, but it also contributes to this constructive eviction, where people are being harassed, or you stop on the street, you are being harassed in public spaces. Where are you going? Where do you live? And stuff like that. Lack of response by when farm dwellers report cases of harassment and abuse have created an impression that subs and private security companies collaborate in the harassment of the citizens in their own homes and public spaces. Rural safety strategy and rural safety plans are a welcome initiative which could improve security in farming areas if implemented and resourced accordingly. That will thus close the space that private security companies occupy. With regard to employment and labor, I will just quickly go through my colleague Sibongiseni at the end will perhaps add if there is anything that I may have missed. Despite the observations about the state of dwellings or houses provided by the farmer or employer on farms, as well as the hostel type accommodation, the number of people living in one room, provision of water and electricity, and the general state of the dwelling, inspectors cannot make any finding or issue enforcement orders because dwellings are not covered under the occupational health safety legislation. So they can see these things, but as it stands now, they say it's not their mandate. Most of casual workers being brought on farms do not have homes of their own on the same farm. Some of them live in nearby township villages, whereas on some farms, they live in hostel type dwellings for the duration of the contract. In some cases, as members have observed, a total of 10 to 20 people share a dormitory type dwelling without any form of privacy, enough room to move around, or for proper ventilation. Absence of retirement plans for farm workers results in them being exploited to the extent that they leave working once they are literally not able to do anything And further, they are subject to evictions once they are no longer in the employ of the farmer or the landowner. There must be mechanisms to assist farm dwellers to attain decent livelihood after employment. The next one is about the fact that Department of Employment and Labor said it doesn't have statistics about labor brokers. It means that these labor brokers, they're able to operate without any form of accountability or regulation, and it does result in the possibility of abuse of farm workers and subjecting them to precarious working conditions. Low level of literacy on farms continue to affect how farms benefit from labor laws and comply with safety signs on farm. This results in unwarranted injuries and exploitation on farm. Farm owners, farm managers, or managers continue to show hostility towards organized labor, denying access to trade unions on farms. Farm owners, as well as managers, indicated that farms are private property and access is controlled due to incidences of crime. So, yeah, that's their main concern. Due in incidences of crime, they can't just, violent crimes for that matter, prevalent in farming, so communities or areas, so they can't just allow anyone. Here now section 7 of the report, we then say that these are the recommendations, and again, like I said before, mainly influenced or arising from the discussions by members, questions, or the inputs. One, and this linked to the other previous inquiries and studies, that the House endorse the relevant findings and recommendations of the Parliamentary High-Level Panel on assessment of key legislation and fundamental change insofar as it relates to farm tenure security and its proposals for legislative amendments, as well as the implementation of land tenure policies. Similar findings and recommendations are contained in the Presidential Advisory Panel on Land Reform and Agriculture. Therefore, the Minister of Agriculture and Land Reform should develop a time-bound action plan on the implementation of the recommendations of the Parliamentary High-Level Panel and the Advisory Panel. So, just to clarify here, these panels were much broader, but there are relevant sections dealing with issues of farm dwellers. So these endorsement proposal here for these, it's an endorsement of the relevant findings and recommendations. And one reviews that, you'll find that everything, almost everything that the reports have raised, it's what members of these two committees have observed during the term of this project. In terms of the recommendations for the Minister of Agriculture, Land Reform, the committees are ensuring that she should consider ensuring that the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development should, in the process of a development of what they call fit for purpose structure, ensure that it revisits establishment of positions to deal with land tenure security on farms, along the model of the former ESTA officers whose responsibilities would be to monitor and respond to cases of eviction, information dissemination, capacity building, and coordination of services for farm workers. They further to the minister to submit a structure or component of structure it relates to the issue of farm tenure security. And this responds directly to what the department is saying: we do not have manpower, we do not have capacity. So we know that the House said to these two committees review legislation, and these next recommendation, it says to the Minister of Agriculture and Land Reform, consider amendments of section 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, and 8.5, section 9.2 and 3, and section 15 of ESTA. And there's a table in this report where we show the details about what needs to be amendments. And these amendments should provide for safeguards or limits against the risk of homelessness when immediate eviction is granted. laws must make it impossible, if not difficult, to leave people on the street. A requirement for court to satisfy itself with regard to available alternative accommodation prior to an eviction order being granted, and that municipalities or a municipality will provide alternative accommodation to an a mandatory requirement of probation reports to any court hearing. Yeah, responds directly to what members said about magistrate courts. Strengthening sections 8, 3, and 4 of ESTA for stronger tenure right protection, especially protections for women and children who are survivors of employers, and occupier who falls within the category of section 8.4 of ESTA, and protection for a spouse or children of long-term occupiers. So these are some of the things with regard to the review of ESTA and what needs to be amended. The report has details around these proposals. The minister again consider ensuring that the Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development consider developing a programmatic approach that triggers application of section 4 of ESTA and not be reactive. You know, this proactive acquisition of land under section 4. Similarly, find mechanisms within which to enable labor tenants who wished or who missed out, sorry for that typo, who missed out on opportunity to submit application to be catered for and be assisted with equitable access to land. Sorry. Submitting a budget and expenditure report to date on the Special Master of Labor Tenants implementation plan and allocation. So that's budget allocation for the awards to be made in terms of labor tenant claims. And I think this is where members wanted to see where is the budget to settle all these labor tenants application, not only for the running of the operations, but the budget to buy, to acquire farms, to fund the awards that the minister will be made. That in the entire process hasn't come out quite strongly. And this is what's been requested here. And there's another report, another recommendation related to these plans is the quarterly progress report on the implementation plan, and detailing how a number of challenges that were identified will be addressed. And continues again in terms of budget, that budget for tenure reform, especially ESTA and LTA, really must consider the precarity of these farm dwellers' tenure security, as well as their marginality, how marginal they are to the society. That there has to be an improved focus, and this really responds directly to what the Human Rights Commission was in one of the reports saying there is lack of political will. So budget also shows, in a way, demonstrate a place of a program in the priority. So what you prioritize, you also fund. The department must submit a report also to indicate how the district development can assist in the development and improvement of the living conditions on farms, specifically to present the DDM plans for farm dwellers in the districts where these DDM is being implemented or coordinated. Making it a requirement, you should consider making it a requirement that when plus funds acquired for lease to emerging farmers, occupiers living on the land with potential to farm success must be supported and to a certain extent be given a first preference rather than bringing farmers from elsewhere, which in turn results in tensions and conflicts. Develop a program that specifically monitors strategic partnerships, mentorships, share equity schemes involving farm workers, and attention should be paid to capacity building, shareholding, including profit sharing, as well as governance of enterprises. Conducting a survey of all farms given to farm dwellers under ESTA, LTA, or Plus is proactive land acquisition strategy, assessing the nature and condition of land use, viability of production, and further needs analysis. Further submit a report of the survey with a costed intervention plan for each farm. That could be done on an area or district-based approach to increase production and sustain land use. Development support should also give due regard to infrastructure development, operational and production support, as well as farm-level institutional arrangement. Here one can also think about, marketing, and maybe the cooperatives in the areas, but as well as the land institutions like CPAs, which in many instances there are problems and they lead to collapse in production. As a coordinator and facilitator for rural development, and in collaboration with the Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, ensure that the Department of Agriculture strengthen the implementation of rural development programs for farm workers and farm dwellers, including these DDM through intergovernmental relations framework. Lack of IGR and deficient implementation of legislative prescription manifested in the lack of tenure security, basic services, and infrastructure in farming areas, as well as numerous labor-related challenges across the areas visited. As farming areas are categorized as rural areas, farm workers and farm dwellers should also be prioritized under the rural development program. The Minister of Police should ensure that SAPS must issue a revised national instruction that clearly states that violation of land tenure rights on farms is a criminal offense in terms of ESTA. Police stations, especially those that serve rural and farming areas, must be trained on ESTA, a range of land tenure rights. The instruction must articulate the precarity of tenure on farms, and that all reported trespass may not be trespassed by land tenure disputes that needs to be resolved within legislative bounds. Ensure further training of police officers on ESTA, LTA in general is I'm lost there, but so further ensure training of police officers on ESTA. I'll fix this, but it's about training of ESTA and LT and police officers on ESTA and labor training insofar as criminal actions are concerned and the expected response of police officers. The minister must submit a report of all cases of eviction and human rights abuses on farms, including livestock impounding, that have been reported in both rural and rural-urban mixed police stations across South Africa, and provide a status quo for each case. So members heard about impounding of livestock, and in many cases, police being responsible for that. So here members wanted to know how the extent of these challenge, particularly in Mpumalanga and KwaZulu-Natal. In liaison with other relevant ministries and interested stakeholders, review regulatory framework for private security companies on farms and ensure that there is strict monitoring of their operations so that they do not become law unto themselves, terrorizing and brutalizing private citizens in public spaces and in their homes. So this gives the minister here to, if there are other departments or stakeholders interested in the matter, to work with them to relook at the operations of private security on farms. For the Minister of Employment and Labor, the proposal is he should consider amending the Occupational Health and Safety Act to provide that the act be made applicable to private dwellings or accommodation provided by farmers on farms or for those private dwellings to be regarded as workplace for the occupation of, for the purpose of occupational health and safety inspections. Also consider developing mechanisms to regulate the number of farm workers, that may share a room or hostel on a farm, in order to ensure that acceptable number of farm workers can live in safe and comfortable place with human dignity and privacy that each individual needs. Ensure that the compensation fund should consider introducing a retirement financial program targeted at farm workers. That would require a proper study and analysis of the circumstances that must be made so that the best suitable product can be developed. Enhancing mechanisms to regulate labor brokers, develop credible database of labor brokers in South Africa with the number of employees, compliance with labor legislation, particularly in relation as it relates to the employment of casual workers. And this we're talking specifically here about in the context of farming areas, farms. Further, produce a report on an annual basis about the impact of labor brokers on the working and living conditions on farms. In line with the district development model, the ministers of agriculture, land reform, rural development, cooperative governance, fix that police and employment and labor should improve coordination of their activities, especially in relation to information dissemination campaigns, training in farming communities in respect of land tenure and labor laws, as well as legal protections available to victims of the violation of their labor and or tenure rights. Department of Employment and Labor must conduct regular training with farming communities so that that are effective with tangible outcomes, including training farmer organizations and farmers themselves about unionization and decent work in farming areas. We conclude by saying that unless indicated, which is not, responses to the above recommendations should be submitted to the National Assembly no later than 3 months after the adoption of this report by the National Assembly, and this report is for consideration by the House. This is where I will end. Through you, Chairperson, I'll ask if my colleagues, if they have anything to add or to subtract, maybe they be to. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Manenje, colleagues and content advisors on both committees, as well as researchers. Any further additions?
I'm covered, Chairperson.
Labo, you are covered. Any other further input? We're looking at content advisors of both committees, Agricultural and Reform and Rural Development, and Employment and Labor. Any further input? If not, can we go to the researchers? Researchers, any further input on your part?
Morning, Chair, morning, members. I'm covered on my side. Thanks.
Thank you. Covered. Any other further input on researchers?
Morning, Chair, morning, members. I'm also covered. Thank you.
Thank you. Employment and Labor researchers? If that is it, honorable members, we'll put to you then the consolidated report of the joint portfolio committees on agricultural and reform and rural development, as well as employment and labor, on their findings regarding the living and working conditions of farm workers and farm dwellers, as well as labor tenants. Honorable members, with that said, we'll open up for questions of clarity or comments on the report. I will then request that honorable members raise their hands before we can be able to acknowledge. It will make it easier for us to see as to which hands are raised and identify you accordingly. And that will therefore make our work easy with Honorable Tunjwa, the Chairperson of Employment and Labor. Mamu Tunjwa, any further comments?
No, none.
Thank you, honorable members. I see the hand of the Honorable Inana.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me thank you, Chairperson, for giving us the opportunity to interact with the presentation. I am very satisfied, Chairperson, with the way that the presentation was made, and very few issues that I want to bring to the attention and to make a statement about. Chairperson, I want to emphasize that the oversight visit across the province or the country should be not taken as a talk show, because the issues that were raised were so very fundamental, and they need the responsibility of these portfolios to make sure that they are implemented. And those that have been identified as observations, we must make a serious follow-up that the recommendations are implemented. I'm raising this, Chair, because you recall, one of the issues that the members of the public were raising, and we were so very concerned about what was raised, was that even previous ministers came and held these public hearings, and people raised a number of issues and they were never implemented. They made, Chairperson, a reference that as far back as during the era of Minister Gugiling Quinty and Mcebisi Kwacha, they came and held the public meetings. The issues they were raising in front of us, they raised before, and there was nothing that was done to correct them. I wanted to applaud you, Chairperson, the way that you led the delegation, that you made the public to understand that it might be possible that we might not come back to make sure that the raised issues are implemented, but it's our responsibility that we hold the government accountable. The other point is just that I wanted to raise is the question that the Department of Agriculture does not have the budget. And therefore, some of the issues that they've raised are becoming limitations because the interventions does not have the budget, and therefore they cannot implement those. And on the issue of Chairperson of the police intervention, it was very, very so sad that we noticed that the police have abdicated their responsibility, Chair, of making the agricultural community safe, in that the private security, the Timberlake was one such security company that was identified, continued to harass the people and failed to take the cases that were raised by the farm workers and those that were laid the charge against them, they were never called to go to court. And some will just find that the case has been concluded, but they were never informed. And those are the issues I think that the report should have also captured, so that the presentation also reflect of what was the community saying. Chairperson, on the issue of the Department of Social Services, DSD, I think it should be added to the list of the ministers of employment, of police, of agriculture, that the department, that the DSD must have the responsibility of how it's going to deal with the available complaints that the members of the community in agriculture are involved in substance abuse, but are not getting any intervention, and they are highly infected with HIV. What is it that the Department of Social Development is doing in order to help those people? And on the issue, Chairperson, of the weak institutions, we need to identify such institutions and have come up with the recommendations. And I would very much be happy if the report can also elaborate what is it that impacts negatively if the institutions are so well. And the last point, Chairperson, I wanted to say, with everything that the presentation has been given, can we conclude to say that there is a substantial assistance to the communities in the farms as far as the living conditions are? Because the way that the problems are happening, and they have been happening for a very long time, I don't see us confirming that there is a positive contribution that the government or the various departments are doing to improve the quality life of the people who are living in the farms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Yinana. If I may request honorable members to talk directly to the report and the issues you were able to pick up in the report, so that we know if there's any additions you would like us to make onto the report, or other things that you feel might have been left out. Because this, for us, we are wanting to adopt the report when we conclude our work today. So please be directive in terms of what you would like to be added or looked into in terms of the report. Agbare Breed.
Môre voorsitter, hoe gaan dit?
Ek is goed, man.
Ek is bly om te hoor. Dis net koud in die Vrystaat. Chairperson, firstly, let me thank our committee staff for the thorough work they did of this report. It really is a 128-page huge document and annexes. So I want to thank them for that. Chairperson, I have one recommendation or one suggestion that I would like to add, and then I just have one other question. So I'll start with my first one. In terms of the first bullet under recommendations, where it makes reference to the presidential advisory panel and its report, I know there was a minority report as well after that report of the presidential, why can't I say that word this morning, advisory panel. And I think that just needs to be included because during a Q&A session of the president, he also made mention that the minority report will be taken into account and will be looked at, and the recommendations will be included. So I just think that needs to be included in that first bullet. And the minority report. And then secondly, Chairperson, during our oversights, and I'm specifically thinking of the Northern Cape, and if I remember correctly, in the Eastern Cape as well, when it was so cold, but specifically the Northern Cape, I can remember, and a few of the others. We had specific recommendations that we as Group 2 spoke of with regards to human settlements and its obligations, as well as water and sanitation and its obligations. It was with regards to water rights. I remember water running through the farm and the farm dwellers not having access there. My question is, I see in our recommendations, we have Dalrad and we have Dal and we have SAPS. We don't have water and sanitation or human settlement, but I know higher up somewhere in the report, Dr. Menenja did make mention that we didn't receive feedback from certain departments regarding recommendations and regarding issues that we raised. So I would just like to find out, is that the reason why we aren't making specific mention of water and sanitation and human settlement, because we haven't received anything? Just clarity on that, Chairperson, because I think maybe in terms of that, that is something we need to add into as well. I'm not completely sure how we need to do that, and maybe if it is covered by our observations, that would suffice. But that is just from my side. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Breed. I think it will be necessary for us to make mention of that, even though we have not been able to have an interaction with the Department of Water and Sanitation. But our observation must be clear that these were some of our findings, and that we would want to have future engagements with the respective departments that we have findings on. I think the content advisor will be able to speak to that before we adopt the report. Honorable Baunonsele.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, honorable members and guests. Thank you, Chair, for the presentation of the report and the extensive background that has been given, which give us the context within which we locate our recommendations. Chair, I just want to make comments and proposals. I'll start from back and move forward. I'll start backwards. I'll start on the recommendations. There is the area that talks to the recommendations with regard to what the Minister of Dalrad should do, particularly with regard to amendments that is on the LTA and ESTA, that is under tenure and land acquisitions, where in fact the Minister is requested to make amendments so that it allows for those who were left out and so on to be covered. I wanted to make a proposal that can't that be also be extended to include by the Minister considerations of the recently adopted bill that is with regard to expropriation. The reason is that currently the provisions provided for by both ESTA and LTA do not make such provisions. And as yet you have cases here of labor tenants and everyone who has benefited from that provision to have stayed and contributed to the well-being of a farm for generations. Some have stayed in the farms for more than 50 years. Their great-grandparents are buried on those farms and grandparents, and as well as their current parents. So in a sense, the families owe their livelihood and heritage on that farm. And yet the provisions of the LTA do not necessarily take that into account. The consequence of that is that the burden is placed now on the government to compensate the farmer, and yet the farmer doesn't compensate those workers for decades of contributions to make the farm what it is today. So the motivation, therefore, for that consideration is within that context. The second point related to that is with regard to how the budgets are used. I think the minister also, because there is a point, if you go to Annexure 1, with regard to the complaints that the committee has picked up, particularly in KZN, Mpumalanga, and Limpopo, where in fact there are gross, including Northwest, gross complaints with regard to the conduct of officials. One common complaint has been around the conduct, where in fact potential beneficiaries would be identified, and upon their identification, they will be allocated a farm, and then suddenly somebody else comes and claims the farm and force those workers or tenants to, in fact, to rezone the farm and force them to live on a worse off conditions. I think you would recall even the demands in particularly Northwest, where there was a demand that a particular office of Dalrat should in fact be closed because it's not helpful to the communities there. So the minister, the considerations that should be made by the minister should also speak to that, so that the issue of easy access to budget that is provided through the LTA and so on should in fact be dealt with, so that this complaint should be dealt much more extensively. So those are the additions on the part of the points that Minister of Dalrat should, in addition to what has been recommended, do. The second point is with regard to the amending of occupational health and safety, which is fine, because I thought that it would be helpful so that we illuminate the context within which we make reference to that, taking into account that Concord has made a decision for the extension of COIDA to domestic workers. That by extension means that Occupational Health and Safety Act should in fact encroach into private premises, and perhaps define this as a workplace, because for inspections and other related aspects with regard to occupational health and safety, you would not be able to achieve it if then both acts do not deal with that area. So I want then to agree with that, so that we also give content to the provisions of the Concord decision with regard to domestic workers. The third point is with regard to compensation fund. I'm not very sure the wisdom of using compensation fund for the recommendations that have been made. That is with regard to Minister of Employment and Labor, because with regard to the question of retirement funds, the point therefore that we would want to propose is that we should rather be talking to amendment of the sectoral determination, which would then talk to the minimum standards that are introduced for farm workers, so that it also guarantees, or at least ensures that employers, people who employ farm workers, amongst the rights and benefits that they should in fact be extended to them. That would include retirement funds, that can include even provident and so on. The conflation of the compensation fund here could in fact create more problems than resolve the problem that currently we're faced with, particularly is faced by farm workers. Lastly, on the recommendations, Chair, I haven't seen a reference to what should be done by the Minister of COGTA with regard to extension of basic services. Because, Chair, you would note that in our report, we talk with, or we make reference to the case law, the case that with regard to the outcomes of the case of Msengu, wherein the court decided that the responsibility of the municipalities cannot in fact be revised when it comes to extension of services to farming areas, which includes water, electricity, and so on. So I thought that that kind of recommendation would also arise, so that we in fact insist that the Minister of COGTA should, by way of whatever means available legally, take that determination of the court and make a provision that in fact formalize that case law. So those are the amendments, Chair, with regard to recommendations. Then go back to the body of the document, Chair. Around the introduction, on the introduction, Chair, the point one wants to make is just for us around the introduction, there is that point 1 and 2 that talks to the House resolution that read, in spite of the policy interventions, Parliament often received complaints about human rights violations, including tenant insecurity. Point 2 reads, the National Assembly seeks answers in relation to the effectiveness of relevant laws and interventions of the executive to improve the conditions of farms, that is close quote. So the proposal, Chair, so that we give a more firmed up single formulation that in fact reinforces the House resolution, which reads that farm workers belong to the category of vulnerable workers. It became paramount of Parliament to, among others, conduct the joint oversight visit to the farming communities to ascertain as to why this continues to be so. Despite the plethora of pieces of legislation, policies, regulation, and programs aimed at improving both working and living conditions in farm, close quote. So the proposal is that we match both 1 and 2 with that formulation. The second point, Chair, is with regard to section that is under the definition of the scope, and that is on bullet 1.3.1, where we propose that we would take out, that is, delete the despite, the word despite. Yeah, then on 1.3.2, that is on limitations, that the sentence currently reads, however, the present useful insights into what happens in farming conditions, the sentence to be completed so that it reads, however, oversight visits conducted by the portfolio committees present useful insights into what happens in farming communities, close quote. So that's the point, that so that it has a more comprehensive meaning to the current formulation. And then The next area, Chair, is on the my notes are not very clear. Just a second, Chair. I'm losing my notes. I'm losing my notes. I don't want to waste your time. I'll come back. Let's allow other speakers, Chair. My notes are confusing me because I was writing. My handwriting is disappearing here. Can I take a break, Chair? Allow other speakers if they are there, then I will come back again.
Thank you, Honorable Nonsele. And Akbare Brett, is your hand still up or is it a legacy hand?
It is a new hand for my colleague, Heloise Denner. She's just at the airport, so she can't talk. So she asked me just to raise a few points on her behalf.
Okay, honorable members, any other hands before I take the hand from the chairperson, Honorable Mamutundra? Just want to check if there are any other hands from honorable members. Akbare Bread, you may proceed, then I'll hand over to the chairperson of Employment and Labor.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, maybe the first point is, and we can maybe, it can maybe be an observation at the point rural safety, is farm attacks and farm murders and the ripple effect that that actually has on, not just on the farms, but on the farm workers and the farm dwellers. I think we saw that during, I think it was our visit to Gauteng. We actually had a farm murder on one of the farms, that was, I think it was a plus farm, if I remember correctly. So I think that's just very important to maybe make note of that as an observation, is the detrimental effect of these farm attacks and farm murders on our farming communities. I think that is necessary. And then, sorry, I'm just looking here, Chairperson. And then also, Chairperson, Honorable Denner says that we have not taken into account, sorry, I'm just trying to translate back into English. There was not taken into account that many of these things also have a set, the employers actually have a burden on the employer, and these things make mention of that. So she feels that we just need to maybe add to that the burden that also, for example, these DL requirements and things have on the employer needs to be included in observations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Akbare Briet. I see the hand of the Honorable Mtabe.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson, and good morning to you and all the honorable members that are present. Sbarwami Siapil. My apology, Chair, that I have not made a specific recommendations as per your request, but there are certain observations, especially on omissions. Firstly, let me welcome the report and thank the scribers for what wonderful work that they've done. The outstanding matters that relates to one is the issue of basic education. There were a number of areas of concern and complaints about the farming community children, both that are going to school and those that are being made farm laborers. Therefore, the issue of recommendations in relation to basic education seem to be missing in what has been presented. The second one is the issue of the report that was presented to us about the illegal immigrants. It seems as if it's something that is widely spread throughout the country, but there is no specific recommendation that talks to that particular matter to employment and labor. I think it's missing. The last one, Chair, it's the report from Legal Aid Board. I'm not sure whether their recommendations were included into the recommendations in relation to ESTA and LTA, because their proposal and presentation made a fundamental transformation into what would then become, or what has become and what has been a norm in relation to evictions. Thank you, Chair. If then the subscribers can then maybe make formulations in relation to that. Once again, I apologize that I did not make concrete recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Siyabonga Sibarwa. Honorable members, I'm gonna
come back.
oh, Banonsele, you coming back?
Yes, yes,
All
Chair.
right,
I think
please do before we hand over to the chairperson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. No, I think Honorable Dabe has covered the points that I wanted to make with regard to these two outstanding matters. And the last one, Chair, was with regard to, because my confusion was to reinvent the presentations that I've made on the recommendations, which now I've cleared up. Thanks for allowing me back. The issue that I want to conclude on is the issue, Chair, that relates to the backlog on the implementation. Because I think we have covered the points correctly on the interventions that the minister should make, that is the Minister of Dalrat. But what we have not covered in our recommendation are in fact steps that must be taken by the minister to deal with how offices have performed, the gross underperformance by the various offices. If, for instance, you go to the report that is talks and gives stats with regard to implementation, between 2001 and today, you'd find that there are quite regions or provinces that have grossly underperformed, with one or nothing that has been done with regard to the implementation of LTA or ESTA, LTA in particular, in those provinces. That part is covered, that is on page 17 and 18 of the report, which talks specifically to, I think, Eastern Cape and the Gauteng being the main ones who have grossly failed to move an inch in terms of implementing. So we need, as part of our recommendations as well, to request or to direct the minister to deal with these cases of gross underperformance that spans to more than a decade, Honorable Chair. Thank you, Chair. I'm covered. Thank you, Chair. Concluded.
Thank you, Honorable Nonsele. The Honorable Chairperson of Employment and Labor, Mamutunjo.
No, thank you, Chair. I think there are areas that I think both Honorable Ndabe and Honorable Nonsele, they've touched on. I want to make a recommendation in terms of illegal immigrants that both departments, that of employment and labor and and agriculture, but I want also to include Home Affairs. And I will say why Home Affairs. That they must come, we must invite them to a joint committee to take us through on their stats in relation to when they were conducting inspections, in particular Dell, how many they have been able to pick up, whether legal or illegal. And now, why Home Affairs? When we were at Gqeberha, in a stakeholders engagement, an official of Home Affairs who is in the immigration, the head of immigration, reflected on a frustration they are having. They said, we do our inspections, joint inspections, we arrest these people, but Justice Department is failing us because it just gives them a slap on their faces, and they are the release. So that's why I'm saying we will also have to also invite Home Affairs, Dell, and Justice in particular to come and explain to us exactly what then is the challenge. The other issue that is not reflecting, I may have missed it, Chair. There were serious allegations about the conduct of some, I'm saying some officials, in particular the inspectors in employment and labor in areas and land in some areas, and the province that where these things were raised sharply. If my memory serves me well, is Free State, and I think KZN. I want to make a recommendation that with that observations that we were subject to, is that both these departments, the accounting authority and the executive authority and the head in terms of DGs, they will have to, because I think in the annexure where it is outlining, they will have to make some investigations and come and report, because it was said in no uncertain terms on how the observations that the frustrations that farm workers are when inspectors visit the farms, they only interact with a farmer, alleging that they are being given some bribes. In Free State, it was said in no uncertain terms in a stakeholder, in a meeting, that they are even given livestock which are transported by using official vehicles. So my recommendation is that must be followed up, and in the whether next when we come back after we rise at the fourth quarter, that we must really get a detailed report on what is it was. We will give them where we were, where was that set, and the office. I agree with the recommendation that with what was said about COGTA, that in the recommendation that's at least said by COGTA, because at the end, these farms are farms that are situated in local, in districts, which districts are in local municipalities. Those, Chair, are the areas that I really wanted them to be lifted and to be put in the body of the report as observations and also as recommendations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson of Employment and Labor, Mahmoud Tunjwa, for your input. I see a fresh hand of the Honorable Treasurer and Honorable Kape.
Thank you, Chairperson. Firstly, let me apologize, Chair. I'm on the road. In case my background is a bit noisy. Greetings to you, Chairperson, and the Chairperson of the Portfolio Committee of Employment and Labor, and greetings to my fellow honorable members and staff. Chairperson, let me first commend the work, the sterling work that has been done by both our portfolio committee staff, the researchers, the content advisors, and this report is even far beyond 100% indeed. They've put it a lot of work. My comment, Chair, is only one. I won't be long. I would like, Chair, with their only recommendation, I would like to propose to the committee that in one of our recommendations, to recommend that, remember, Chair, agriculture is part of the economic cluster, and it contributes 3% of the GDP of the economy of the country. Now, on the issue, Chair, I'm raising this point, Chair, with that background, that we recommend that we legislate, we put a legislation on the employment of foreign nationals. It must be a regulation, we regulate that no foreigners can just come. For instance, there is a farmer in PE. Is it PE?
Come to Sarah Batman.
Yes, in Sarah Batman, where about 60% to 70% of the employees are foreign nationals, which it tempers and it really tempers with our economic growth and employment growth of our country. So if, Chair, we could recommend that we regulate, that we don't just employ any foreigner, except that there's a scarce case, that it cannot be found in the country. I think, Chair, it will also deal with our major headache as a country of unemployment. Indeed, we don't need a rocket science to just pick oranges and apples whilst our people are here. And also, Chair, if we align that with the recent stats of some, not most, some of the criminal activities, especially in farm areas, that are the burglaries, the murderers that are done or are committed by some of the foreign nationals because they are undocumented. By doing so, when we regulate that, Chair, we also held accountable the farmers that are also part of this criminal activity, Chair. Because this thing of theirs of employing illegal immigrants is really collapsing our economy. That is my only contribution, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Treasurer. I saw a hand of Honorable Kape and Honorable Ntate Masipa afterwards. You may proceed.
And greetings to both the chairs and my colleagues and everybody on the platform. My apologies, Chair, that I've been traveling this morning. It has been a mission to get out of airport and I've been hurrying to get to the car. Chair, let me also echo the sentiment of appreciation to the compilers of the report. They have like always, done a sterling job. And I'm mindful, Chair, that there are many issues probably that we would have wanted to see. And Chair, I would also agree with the sentiment that Honorable Chwete has just indicated on foreign nationals as employees that needs really to be regulated. Everywhere where we visited, accompanied by the immigration officials, this was a sticky matter, not only of them taking these jobs, but also about their treatment. So it needs attention moving forward. Chair, we also have to be mindful that there are issues of children that must not fall into the cracks. We must also, as and when we move forward with our programs, because at some stage we need to conclude this, but taking on this thematic departments develop action plans. Issues of children must be highlighted, children on the farm, their welfare, their social needs, and everything pertaining to their education. We have also, Chair, realized the issue of judicial system, the unfairness that is outplaying on the farm areas, where farm laborers, farm dwellers will have cases against employers that never flies. Now I'm saying, Chair, it's a whole range of issues. Ours is to guard the programs, the activities that these departments will be undertaking so that these matters don't fall into cracks. I will therefore, Chair, want to, and we will have, as and when we retreat, as these two departments have to look into the specifics and say what will be issues to be tackled in the immediate, in the medium term, and in the long term. And also, Chair, because some of the things will be in the long term, we should say it here and now, as and when there are issues that will be outstanding, let them reflect in our legacy reports so that those who come after us, and hopefully it will not be many issues, we are geared to deal with these issues here and now. They should reflect so that it becomes a continuation. So, Chair, having said that, I would say I am good with the report, and I don't have qualms with adopting the report today. But as and when we retreat, let's look at, as and when we play oversight, if our departments, the activities out of this recommendation will speak to the issues that we want to address. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Kabe. Honorable Ntate Masipa, and those that have spoken, if you have no other questions, please lower your hands. Honorable Ntate Masipa.
Chair, thank you very much. Please excuse me, I am also traveling like Metlape, so I'm working on my cell phone. Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity, and good morning to all the colleagues. I also want to extend my appreciation for the work of our officials in terms of putting these reports together. Chair, I think the first point I want to make, or recommendation I want to make to our officials is that maybe on the recommendation, they must just try and number it so that, when we talk to it, we can refer to in the numbering format. The second point that I want to make is with regards to, I don't know what page, I think it's page 50, where it's written, ensuring that the DELRAT consider developing a programmatic approach that triggers application of Section 4 of ESTA and not be reactive to evictions. Similarly, find mechanisms within which to enable labor tenants who missed. So that sentence must be worded properly. I think who wished and missed out an opportunity to submit application to be catered, to be assisted with equitable access to land. So, Chair, while I agree in the spirit of the latter, I mean the spirit of this recommendation, I think key for us is to stress the importance of ensuring the tenure rights. As we have seen, ESTA has been used in these farms as a reactive mechanisms rather than a protective mechanisms. So until and unless the department proactively work on tenure rights and tenure security of our farm workers and our residents in the whole country, this is not gonna end. So I think the wording here should also, consider that tenure rights must be something that the department focus on. The second part, Chair, I have heard the issue of the foreigners. While, this is an issue for many South Africans, but I think the opportunity we missed here with this particular work that we were doing, and there is no recommendation, obviously, here, is the issue of the manning of the borders, that we haven't really engaged our Home Affairs with regards to manning of the borders and ensuring that people are obviously illegally in the country. Maybe as an observation, that could be something that is spoken to, because we haven't really tested whether some of these workers are legally or illegally, because key is that we as parliamentarians, we cannot be coming across as a bit xenophobic with regards to our way of addressing this matter. We got to be factual and scientific around this, addressing this matter. So those are two of my observation, Chair, that I just wanted to make with regards to this report. Otherwise, I might have to indulge much more and make further input, but I doubt that I will have another opportunity. But we will possibly, debate in the House as well. So there will be some more inputs regarding this report. Thanks very much, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Dr. Masipa. Before I conclude the session and hand over to the content advisors, I see another hand of Honorable Nonsele. Please proceed.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Just to firm up on the point of foreign workers, Chair, so that we have, I want to make a proposal with regard to the issues that must be directed to the Minister of Employment and Labour. Currently, Chair, the department or the ministry is currently busy with a policy discussion document relating to labor migration policy, which amongst other deals with the issue of regulating the labor market relating to foreign workers. So can we maybe just, as we formulate that, also call on the minister to speed the section that deals with the engagement of foreign workers, because that would include also the question of imposition of quotas and all relevant matters so that the issues raised by Honorable Chwete are in fact fully covered, which we fully support because they have nothing to do with xenophobia. They have to do with addressing what currently deals with us negatively, which is the high rate of unemployment in our country. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Nonsela. Honorable members, that is all the input we've received from yourselves. And before I hand over to the content advisors and the researchers to touch on some of the issues you've raised, which will be included in the report, and we will adopt the report after their input with all the input having been taken into consideration and amendments made accordingly. Would also want honorable members to take the opportunity to applaud our staff of Parliament and of the joint committees for the standing work they've done in putting together this report. And it is talking to all the oversight visits that we had right across the landscape of our country, visiting the respective provinces, and therefore want to truly applaud them for having produced this consolidated report. I would also want to touch on some of the issues that honorable members have raised, in particularly on the report with the gross violations that are being meted on a daily basis towards farm workers and farm dwellers. The report seemed to be lacking in terms of being explicit in some of the issues. And I would like to recall what was put to us in Gertsebande district municipality, where a farm worker was shot in the eye by a farm owner in the presence of the police, and nothing was done about the case. No case was opened and no arrests have been made to date. At the very same engagement, we were told that the very same farmer went to a neighboring farm where there was a complaint and shot and killed two brothers on that farm. To date, there's never been a case or an arrest made on him. So we need to speak to such observations and put it explicitly that South African Police Services is doing a gross injustice in terms of ensuring that our farm workers and farm dwellers are protected in their places of work. We've also had such gross violations in our oversight in KwaZulu-Natal. So I think we should also be explicit in putting that real engagement with the South African Police Services needs to be looked into and ensure that farm workers and farm dwellers are protected. But also, honorable members, has been a real concern from farm workers and farm dwellers about officials of the department who often are bribed, who often find themselves on the wrong side of the law, and they themselves engage in fraudulent activities. So we would like that to be looked into and ensure that the necessary departments look into those matters. But I'll also say that the report is lacking in being explicit, particularly in some of the areas where the community is called for a total shutdown and closure of the Department of Agriculture in some of the areas we visited. If you look into Piet Retief, the community there was very clear that they want the minister to close down the office and look into appointing new people to serve that community. Even in the area of KwaZulu-Natal in Noma Ndini, this was very clear from the community engagement. But I'll also concur with Honorable Kape in terms of the protection of children in these farming communities. Also should be looked into, and I didn't see the report being explicit on some of our findings when it came to children living on farms and farmlands. But overall, honorable members, I must also talk to the issue Honorable Masipa is raising, that we shouldn't appear to be xenophobic on the matter of foreign nationals. But I would put it to you, honorable members, that with the 66% of unemployed youth in South Africa, we need to put a recommendation that says that all foreign nationals must be prohibited from working on any of the farms, and that farm working opportunities should be set for young people in South Africa first and foremost. And when the numbers may not be filled, then legal foreign nationals with proper documentation that are in South Africa and have permits to work in South Africa can be considered. I will put it to you, Honorable Masipa, that in most instances where we visited and found there were foreign nationals, we were not even provided with sufficient documentation just for us to be taken into confidence that these foreign nationals are legally in South Africa and do have working permits to work in South Africa. So therefore, I would put it, honorable members, that the report should be explicit in that regard, ensure that we safeguard these jobs in order for us to curb these high unemployment rates, particularly within young people. That would be all on my side, and we will hand over to the content advisors and researchers to reflect on the input that honorable members have had. I see the hand of Honorable Masipa. Is that a legacy hand, Tate Masipa?
No, it's a new hand, Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, my notes, I couldn't get to them quicker when you get. So the other point that I just wanted to make to this report is that with regards to the failing police, and you will know that we have been calling for the devolution of powers of the police to the provinces so that the coordinations can be much better in dealing with issues of crime. So we definitely believe that we have to consider that point. The second point is that we haven't seen the district model working anywhere. As as it stands now, the district model is not working, has not really proven to be working. So I do not believe that is one of the recommendations that we can really support. I just wanted to make those 2 points as well. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Ntate Masipa. Will now, honorable members, take this opportunity to hand over to Dr. Manenje and other content advisors from Employment and Labor to reflect on the input that has been made by yourselves, and also allow the researchers to also give comment and reflect on the inputs. Dr. Manenje, you may proceed.
Sure. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to honourable members for the comments that they have made with regard to this report. Obviously, a lot has happened, and there's a lot of information around with regard to what members have been saying throughout since the beginning of this task that the National Assembly. And the difficulty has been, how do we bring them in a more comprehensive way to the extent that it will address all the issues concerned. We note and we accept that the report we must try and be more specific to the issues. That means that I just want to confirm what I'm thinking around how we will proceed. It means that we are going to be going to the annexures and take some of these specific issues that illustrate certain points and maybe bring them into report as examples or particular cases. And some of the issues, so I'll talk to around omission. So I'm not gonna be specific.
My apologies, Dr. Manenj.
Sure.
My apologies. I think for the purpose of honorable members, if the issues have been captured in our annexures, is simply to say in the report that you can then look into annexure so and so in this particular province. We don't specifically say that all the issues that are in the annexures must now be brought back into. You can just refer to those issues. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That helps and it clarifies. So the question around the omissions, members have raised questions around recommendations, particularly for children, social services on farm, education. So some of these issues are in the report, but they have not been brought into the recommendations. And what I hear is that members are saying, go and formulate quite clear recommendations around those issues. And I will do that, factor in to ensure that, for example, I can give social development saying, well, we have not up to this stage to cope with their have not sort of evaluated the protections of children on farm, but going forward. So I think it's about emphasizing that and say there must be programs that specifically deal with issues of children and continuously monitor what happens, child labor, food security on farms, and people with children on farms, are getting access to nutritious food. To my colleague, will respond to the questions that relate to employment and I'll touch on that relates specifically to land tenure.
Dr. Manenje, please try and speak up because we're beginning to lose you and are having difficulty in hearing you.
Oh. Okay. How is it now? Am I better?
Yes, you are audible now. We can hear you clearly. Please proceed.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. So the first issue that came up was around the institutional arrangements, and what the report says here is that these has been weakened over time. Initially, there were very strong institutional support around tenure security, not only in terms of employment, human resource capacity, but the collaboration broadly in government, from the CCMA, from Department of Agriculture, Land Reform, Department of Labor, civil society organization. So that's the recommendation that we are making. It's there. It has to be strengthened. coming. But what the report says there is capacity, and the report says there is work being done. And there was a question whether can we conclude that there is work being done to advance the socio-economic conditions on farm. What the report shows is that there is legislation, there is work that is being done, but there is a disjointed approach. And to an extent that it actually limits the extent to which the extent of the success that is anticipated. So what the recommendation is more collaboration and harnessing all the skills that's lying elsewhere and say, can we make interventions to, for instance, issue the budget for acquisition of land. It's a reality. The budget is very little. So that's where the minister must really engage with. The question around the minority report, because there is the here that says endorse the report. So what the recommendation in this report is that, like I think I explained it to say, it relates to those specific recommendations that affect farm workers and farm dwellers and labor tenants, so tenure related. So it's the entire report. So the minority report, I am assuming that it's part of that report. And therefore, if there is any recommendation that talks to issues of farm dwellers, labor tenants, we're saying the committee, the National Assembly must also consider those. And that if there is a tension around what the main report is saying, again, it's because the committee says ministers come and report to Parliament within these time frames. Minister will have to reflect on what the minority report says with regard to tenure issues and what the main report says. Perhaps to clarify it, we can. There is no harm in making mention of the report. The question around human settlements, provision of housing, indeed the report goes, but I think when I listened, members want to see a specific recommendation. And the report says one of the things is that in terms of the needs register, not many farm workers are registered in that. So maybe a recommendation that I suggest we include is about human settlements, working with local municipalities and the Department of Agriculture Land Reform jointly, initiating campaigns to just to get people on farms who need these houses and to register in that. More work needs to be done with owners, farmer organizations around the meaning and what it means. There was a question that relates to, I think it's that relates to the burden that all of these places on farm workers. It's already in the not on farm workers, on farmers. It's already in the report. When the section that deals with the structural factors that impact on farm workers, there is specific mention about the farmer's point or the landowner's perspective of ESTA and all the regulations, that they feel like it's cumbersome, it's heavy on them, too much bureaucracy. Hence, many of the farm owners today, they're no longer pro building houses on farms for fear of all regulations. So it's something that's already contained in the report. I'll refer members to the section that deals with the structural factors. And it mainly drew from that ILO made by Ms. Professor. But my colleague, Ms. Nobo, can also add on that, particularly as it relates to issues in the Northern Cape raised around human settlements and water rights. The question of expropriation, indeed, the report doesn't specify, because expropriation is the mode of acquisition. So the report doesn't specify exactly, but I think it's a point that came in one of the deliberations, in one of the meetings where members deliberated this matter. And the question was around, if you have labor tenants already living on the land that a landowner is not using, protected legally, why is it difficult to expropriate that? So we can make reference to that in one of the recommendations where we speak about acquisition of land and for the minister to consider expropriation of land. The reason why we did not put it at this point in time, it's because that the bill has not been passed into law yet. And so we did not want to refer it, but we can speak about expropriation broadly, and perhaps that at that point, when there is a legislation that empowers a minister, especially the expropriation that is just inevitable, meaning that it's not based on the sort of the market-based compensation. So we accept that. We will frame one of the recommendations that deals with acquisition of land. So the report really it does address issues about capacity of the offices and the districts and access to that. We do say somewhere that there must be an engagement by the minister, also with Treasury, to try and secure more resources. And also that relates to the work of the special master, that it has to be capacitated to do what it's supposed to do as ordered by the court. My colleague, Mr. Mo, will address issues around occupational health and extension to private dwellings or houses built by the farmer, and link that to the case law, the Concord, and as it relates to issues of COIDA and domestic workers, and the sexual determination will address that. Yes, the report does go into detail about the Chengo matter. There is no specific recommendation. I think in the report we do speak about a need for municipalities. No, there is somewhere a recommendation about municipality building plans, but I think it's about tightening it effectively. The issues of I totally agree. We will narrow down to recommendations on basic education and child labor. The members were explicit now about issues of illegal immigrants, the undocumented foreign nationals. And I think if members will remember, in some of these farms that were visited during inspections, inspectors were able to tell the delegation the number of South Africans and foreign nationals. But in some instances, the inspectors could not specifically say whether these were documented or not. And these were matters where they already were taking them forward with Home Affairs. So I agree we need to have specific recommendation around employment, labor, Home Affairs, agriculture working together to address this question of undocumented foreign nationals, or the employment of foreign nationals and the issues of quotas. I think my colleague, Ms. Ngogo, will also address that, as also it relates to the National Labour Migration Policy and the Employment Services Bill, which in the report we do indicate that it's not, it's the discussion around this bill ongoing. The report does make mention of the conduct of some of inspectors and officials, and I think the report that in the report there was a case where, two cases basically in the Northwest, where the department reported that there were investigations around corruption and all that, but they said apart from those two there was nothing. But what I hear members saying is that there must be a thorough around the work being done by officials, not only labor inspectors. Allegations also came from members of the public with regards to those officials responsible for tenure reform and allocation of farms, and sometimes what seems to be collusion between landowners and officials who insist that farm workers must leave farms. So the recommendation again around the issues of labor migration, which my colleague will talk to, does call for intergovernmental coordination. I think we will do that. So we saying accounting authorities must and executive must do investigation. Not only end there, they say they must bring a report back to these two committees. We've already spoken about the foreign nationals. My colleague will elaborate on that. Also talking to the issue around, it's not only about their employment, but it's also the issue around state. And with regard to the judicial system in unfairness, the report, it goes into detail to talk about, refusal of police to open cases, and when they are open, there is no prosecution. And sometimes, as members elaborated, that then they will hear that case closed, but they have not been, there's no investigation.
So as they want to. The thing is, you must not use land and 17. Hence, who was capable?
Please assist us and mute your microphone. There's a Huawei P30. Please mute your microphone. I understand you may be having your installation being done, but it can't be part of our joint setting. Please mute your microphone. Apologies, Dr. Manenje. You may proceed.
I apologize on their behalf. And I can link that to the Legal Aid Board presentation and the recommendations to this committee that they have made. And if you look at the proposals that are being made with regard to legislative amendments, they derive mainly from the inputs of the Legal Aid Board. But there is no recommendation really specifically to the Legal Aid Board for the attention by the Legal Aid Board, which I take it as a point that we must again perhaps put something around, because they do mention issues of having to engage with the courts. There's also issue around training. In one of the briefings with stakeholders, there was an issue that perhaps this committee can really champion this idea of dissemination of information and training of those in the justice system, and that could be led by the Legal Aid Board, working with justice colleges and all that. I propose to the committee that perhaps we have the recommendation to the legal board around this matter of training and police officers, magistrates, and those that are responsible for compilation of probation reports. I think those are the questions in general, without responding to individual questions. My colleague Mr. Ngobo will respond or will add to the issues that I have not done, and any other colleague who would like to add. Thank you.
Ngobo, please proceed.
Thank you, Honorable Chairpersons of both committees. The issue that came out strongly was the employment of foreign nationals. And the Department of Employment and Labor has already published the National Labor Migration Policy, which is accessible on the website of the Department of Employment and Labor for members to have a look at, and I think it addresses most of the concerns that the members have raised regarding the employment of foreign nationals. Another issue that also came out strongly is of labor inspectors being bribed by farmers. That issue was raised before with the department, and the department pointed out the difficulty that we have with this issue being raised without specifics. It becomes very difficult for them to address it because they don't know exactly who the culprit is. So it will help if such issues are raised, the specifics are provided so that the department will be able to follow up on such issues. And I think the researcher will respond to some of the other issues that I have not addressed. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Baung Nobo, for your input. Any other further input from the researchers? Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development researchers?
Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I just want my colleague.
Before that, Chair, sorry, before that, can I get clarity, if you may allow me? And I want to raise this because I'm a little bit confused. I just want to be clarified. We have been presented a report which we commended that it's work well done. There are issues that we, as members, we then felt that they should be, it's issues that we have observed and would then like them to be recommended, to be put as recommendations. Now, I'm a bit confused. It's worse with the latter, with what the conduct advisor of Dale said. My understanding is that in areas where we were, in particular, we did ask people, we referred people to them if they are afraid to say it's a farmer Donjwa who has done this. It's an inspector which went to farmer Donjwa that was given this. We referred. So for us to, for now in the meeting to be said, we must give details. What was then there? I'm a bit confused, Honorable Chair, really, that this process that we're engaged on now, is it a process that is then beginning to say the issues that we raised are not of material nature to the observations that we made when we were physically in these farms? And so that's why we're raising them. Others, we are putting more flesh in my understanding. So if I can just be clarified, Chair Uguchi, now what are we doing? What then is then, what are the implications of what is going to happen to these issues that we've raised? Our conduct advisors saying there are issues that are not of material, or I don't want to say they are irrelevant because they've already been raised in the body of the report. If I can just be clarified, I'm really, honestly, I'm confused now that what is it now that is being done?
Thank you, Honorable Donjwa.
I raised my hand, sir.
Yes, I will come back to you, Baunotsele. If I may just assist the Honorable Chairperson of Employment and Labor, Mamutunjo. I think this is why initially I had said to the content advisor in my input that all the findings of the committee are in our reports of each province. And those reports go into the specific details of each finding and the recommendations that we have had. So what was lacking in this consolidated report is to refer to such an annexure when we were making examples of a particular case. To say if there's a recommendation on investigation of officials, this should then be put as an example. This was a finding in such a province. I had alluded to that when I made input. Dr. Manenje had said they would do that accordingly. And I think from the input that has been made by honorable members in their questions of clarity or even comments, the content advisors are now responding to say that these issues we have raised will be included in the report and will be acknowledged. There isn't anything that we can, as a joint committee, disregard and say it's irrelevant. Our work has to be reflective of what our findings have been, and we must talk to that. And that's why I say that the consolidated report cannot go into all the specifics, because those specifics are in the provincial reports that we have been able to put together as annexures. I hope that assists. But let me take the hand of Honorable Baunotsele and then allow the researchers to also conclude. So then we can be able to move to the adoption of the report with the necessary amendments. Baunotsele?
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I don't want to go the long route of Umamutunja has already covered. But what I wanted to maybe suggest, Chair, is that I don't think it's going to help us to be schooled on what we've made in terms of presentations. We are appreciative of what the content advisors have done, particularly with regard to the report that has been presented. What I understand, Chair, is that anything that does not form part of the recommendations in the report falls out. So if it's not in the recommendation, I think also content advisors know that. If it's not in the recommendations, you can have even a 1,000 volume of a document. But what matters are the recommendations. So please let us not waste time on that, because we're enriching the recommendations that are not covering those areas. And the summary of, in parts of what Dr. Maneze was saying, does in fact allude to that, which is captured also to your summary. I think it was worse what Mr. Ngobo was saying. Perhaps I think also the latitude that we give to people who are not members, I think should also be considered. Sometimes it creates problems. Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honorable Notsele. Honorable members, all our considerations will be put and will be part of the recommendations with the necessary amendments as to our wishes. We were requesting the researchers of both committees to respond or add if any additions they had. Mam Kwabe, Mam Papetega, on agriculture, land reform and rural development. Any further input?
Chair, no input, no material input on my side. But on the issue of foreign workers and them having the required permits, especially considering scarce skills, the only category of people that I know are exempted are people with a skill for sheep shearing. I think in the past couple of years, the National Wool Growers Association has made several representations before the committee as well to try and get assistance from the Minister of Home Affairs to allow for sheep shearers to be given scarce skill permits. So it's a minor contribution that has no material bearing on the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mam Kwabe. Mam Pepetega.
Hi, Chair. I think on the issue of allegations against officials, I think as manager did say that the department did promise that they would go to investigate. I think what we should recommend is just for the both departments to do a proper investigation and then report back to both committees on what they found out from the investigation. I think that needs to be added there. I think the other issue is the issue that Nantsele mentioned about that the issue of retirement not to be included in terms of compensation fine, that it should be part of the amendment for the Secretarial Determination Act, which I think I agree with and I think will be included in the recommendation. Yeah, I think those are what I think will be that needs to be added. Thank you.
Thank you, Mam Pepetega. These are the recommendations that honorable members have wished to be included, and will be happy if they are reflected as such. Any other input from the researchers of employment and labor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, most of the things have already been covered. I mean, we will take into account all the comments that have been made towards the report. But what is most important, what I see is that most of the things that were raised by members were actually covered in the provincial report. We must find a way to refer to it in the annexures to make sure that that there's clarity where some of the recommendations are actually coming from. Thank you.
Thank you from the researchers of both committees. Honorable members, with that said, it brings us to the end of the presentation and responses. Having considered the recommendations we wish to be effected, will now request to move for the adoption of the report of the joint committees, that being of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development, as well as that of Employment and Labor on their oversight visits regarding the living and working conditions of farm workers, farm dwellers, and labor tenants. Can we have a mover for the adoption, honorable members? I see a hand of Honorable Breed.
Dankie, Voorsitter. Chairperson, two things. I think it is very important for us to see these amendments that were proposed and are made. So I think we just need to set a timeline on that to maybe get that report. And then, Chairperson, just please note the objection of the FF Plus to this report.
The report will be made available, honorable members, before we send it to the House. But as it has been presented, the only thing we've requested is for the other three recommendations to be included, which will also enable us to speak to the examples that are in the annexures that came out. So there's no real change to the report. Hence, we are requesting for the adoption of the report. We do note the objection of the Freedom Front Plus and any other parties that may wish to make a submission of their objection, they're most welcome to do so. But in the interim, can we move for the adoption?
Chairperson?
Bawinana, you may proceed.
Chairperson, thank you very much. Please,
I'll call you. Tell me. Let me see.
Tate Matias, please mute your microphone. Yes, Bawinana, proceed.
Chairperson, I've just said that please register the objection of the Democratic Alliance.
We do register and note the objection of the Democratic Alliance. And we have a mover for the adoption of the report, Honorable Kape.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Chair. Chair, I move for adoption of the report as indicated with those additions on amendments.
Thank you, Honorable Kape moves for the adoption of the report with amendments. And we have a second, honorable members. I see the hand of Honorable Natsele.
Thank you, Chair. Honorable Metis Nonsele. Second, the motion is moved by Honorable Kape for the adoption of the report with amendments. So I move, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Natsele, for
Honorable Chair.
the adoption of the report. Yes,
Honorable Chair.
Tate Matias.
Well, Honorable Chair, the EFF obviously will support the report, but I want to say two things before I make my input. Before I move for second.
That's fine, Tate Matias.
Just two things.
Yes, no, I will acknowledge you because you haven't had any input in the proceedings. But I do put it to you that both Honorable Kape as well as Honorable Notsele have moved and seconded the adoption. But please proceed, Tate Matias, and give your input.
Honorable Chair, in my support of the report, I just want to quote two sources. One is Chris Zani when he said, for as long as the economy remains in the hands of the unelected few, there will always be a cause to fight for socialism. Secondly, the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the EFF says, for as long as the children of the poor live in inferior conditions and fed less and inferior food in comparison to the food that is fed to the animals, the dogs of the rich, there will always be a cause for struggle. I think these codes are relevant in the conditions in which families of farm workers, farm dwellers, and labor tenants find themselves. There are incidents in provinces that we have seen for ourselves, that pets such as dogs and animals such as sheep are taken care of, are fattened than the workers who works on those farms. And those members of the DA and the Freedom Front who have the courage to speak against and to vote against this, they must be ashamed of themselves. With these few words, Honorable Chair, second the members who have moved for adoption of this report. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Tate Matias, for your input. It's noted and registered. Honorable members, with the report having been adopted, can we request honorable members to mute your microphones as you are disturbing the proceedings? Tate Matias, please mute your microphone. I'll take this opportunity now to hand over to the Honorable Chairperson of Employment and Labour for closing remarks and adjournment. Mamutunjwa.
No, thank you, Chair, and thank you to all members and the staff of both committees for the work well done, and a report that we will then be able to table in the House. Just safe to say, Chair, I hope all of us, these oversights visits that we conducted are an eye-opener, because what we have physically been seen, and which we have emotionally and psychologically been subjected to in these oversights, I think all of us just have close our eyes and say, my children are living under a roof. They go to school having had breakfast. There is transport waiting for them, or I can afford to take them to school. And remember that there are children that are walking 5 kilometers to and fro to school. They are women whose dignity and men whose dignity is just being destroyed. For me, I have learned with a very heavy heart and observed how some of South African citizens that, well, if you call it freedom, democracy, it's still a pipe dream. And I hope as we move forward, our conscience will always remind us that we have been exposed to that situation, and hoping that it is not going to be the end of this. I hope before we rise in 2024, we will then have to have a second round, Chair, of an oversight of this nature, which is going to include, in particular, some of the departments that we think they are to make and break. They are to make a life of a farm child, a farmer who works in a farm's child and wife better. With those, Chair, I want to thank everybody and yourself for chairing this meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson of Employment and Labour, Mamutunjwa, for your closing remarks. Honorable members, mine is simply to thank you all for entrusting in us to be able to steer this ship and get us through the work, immense work that was entrusted on us by the Parliament of the Republic in the National Assembly. I therefore want to thank all the staff of the joint committees for enduring the work and being with us through the entire sessions that we had going around the country. And those that are always in the shadows, preparing for the logistical work and ensuring we are able to move from one area to the next, who've been in the exercise. We thank you all. Most importantly, honorable members, those that actually captured every input that came from public hearings and ensure that we have been able to come up with this consolidated report. We thank you all. as the staff of parliament and the staff of the joint committees. Enkosi, inkomo, raleboga, siabulela, danki, and thank you very much. The meeting stands adjourned.
Goodbye.
Siyabonga Mthembu.
See you next time.
Siyabonga Dlomo.
Kosi.
Kaloku ufuna ndikubonge ndiyazalwa.
Inani? Awena umngani wami wena. Awena umngani wami.
Mamele Henan.
Yes.